Reddit relationship stories. I found my husband's second phone after 11 years of marriage, and what was on it was not what I expected. My name is Caroline. I am 43 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington, and 11 months ago, I found a phone in my husband's gym bag that I had not known existed and spent the next 4 hours understanding that my husband of 11 years had been living with a secret that had nothing to do with another woman. I want to tell you that clearly before I tell you anything else, because when I say I found a second phone, the story your mind goes to is not the story I am going to tell you. My husband's name is Patrick. We have been married for 11 years and we have 2 sons, Caleb, who is 9, and Miles, who is 7. Patrick is a software engineer, quiet and methodical, the kind of person who solves problems in structured ways, and who has always been the most stable presence in our family. I found the phone on a Wednesday evening when Patrick was in the shower, and I was looking in his gym bag for his car keys, which he had borrowed that morning. The phone was at the bottom of the bag under a spare shirt. It was an older model, nothing fancy, and it was off. I turned it on. It had no lock code. What was on it was not messages to another woman. What was on it was a notes app with 47 entries, a saved email draft folder with emails that had never been sent, and a voice memo folder with 31 recordings. I sat on the edge of our bed, and I went through all of it in 4 hours while Patrick slept and my son slept, and the house was entirely quiet. The notes were a journal. Patrick had been keeping a private journal on a phone I did not know about for 4 years. The entries were dated and were the honest interior record of a man I had been living with for 11 years and had known less completely than I had believed. What the journal contained was not betrayal in any conventional sense. It contained his real feelings about his work, which had been making him deeply unhappy for 3 years while he had been telling me everything was fine. It contained his real feelings about his father's death 2 years ago, which he had moved through in our presence with a steadiness I had admired and which had apparently been a performance. The real grief was in the notes, raw and specific, and nothing like the composure I had witnessed. It contained his real feelings about our marriage, which were not bad. I want to be clear about that because I read every word, and what I found was not a man who wanted to leave or who was unhappy with me specifically. What I found was a man who felt he could not be fully honest with the people in his life, because full honesty had always created problems, and that this phone was the only place he could say things exactly as they were. The unsent emails were drafts he had written to people, his manager, his brother, me, saying things he had decided not to send. One of them was to me. It was 3 pages long, and it said things about his inner life, his fears, his experience of our marriage from inside his own head that I had never heard him say in 11 years of conversation. The voice memos were recordings he had made while driving, talking to himself, working through problems, saying things out loud that he apparently needed to say somewhere. I listened to 12 of them. I stopped at 12 because I was crying and needed to stop. I put the phone back in the bag. I went to bed. I lay next to my husband, and I thought about the 3-page email he had written to me and never sent, and the 47 journal entries, and the 31 voice memos, and I understood that I had been living with someone who had a whole interior life that he had not known how to share, and that I had not known to ask for. I told Patrick in the morning that I had found the phone. I told him I had gone through it. I told him I was not angry. I said this carefully because I needed him to hear it before he became defensive, and that I wanted to talk about what I had found. Patrick went very still. Then he said, "How much did you read?" I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time. What followed was the most honest conversation we had had in 11 years of marriage. Patrick told me about the work unhappiness and the grief and the specific ways he had learned growing up that showing difficult feelings created problems rather than solutions. He told me about the phone, that he had started it as a way of having somewhere to put things, and that it had become something he depended on because it was the only place he was entirely himself. He told me about the email he had written to me. I asked him if he would send it. He sent it to me that afternoon from his regular phone. The same words, the same 3 pages, delivered to my inbox 11 years after they had first needed to be said. Patrick is in individual therapy. We are in couples therapy. The phone is gone not because I asked him to get rid of it, but because he said he did not need it anymore, and I believe him. What we are building now is a marriage that has room for the things that used to go into a notes app on a hidden phone, and that is a different and better thing than what we had before. Update. 4 months later. Patrick showed me a journal entry last month. Not the phone journal, a paper journal he has started keeping that he said I was welcome to read if I wanted, and that he would also share directly when the entries were about things I should know. He showed me an entry about a conversation we had last week that he had written about afterward. Reading his account of a conversation I had also been present for was one of the stranger and more moving experiences of recent months, seeing how he had experienced something I had also experienced, seeing what he had noticed that I had not noticed, seeing his interior version of a moment we had shared. I told him I was glad he had shown me. He said he was working on showing rather than storing. I told him I thought that was the right direction. Miles climbed into my lap while we were talking and fell asleep, and Patrick and I sat on the couch with our sleeping 7-year-old between us and did not say anything for a while, and it was one of the better moments of the past year. Story 2. Reddit relationship stories. My boyfriend of 4 years proposed to me at my sister's wedding and I said no. Here is why and what happened after. My name is Amanda. I am 31 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, and 2 years ago I said no to a marriage proposal at my sister's wedding in front of 112 guests and my entire family, and I have thought about that moment every day since, and I have not once believed I made the wrong decision. My boyfriend's name was Daniel. We had been together for 4 years, and we had been happy for most of those 4 years in the specific way of two people who work well together in the day-to-day, and who have not yet fully examined whether the day-to-day is the same as wanting the same future. Daniel is a kind person. I want to say that clearly, because what I did at my sister's wedding was public and difficult, and it requires context that his kindness provides. He is not a bad person. He made a decision that was wrong for us, and I responded to it in real time, in the only way I was able to. My sister's name is Rachel, and her wedding was the event that she had planned for 18 months, and that was beautiful in exactly the ways she had wanted. The ceremony was at a vineyard outside Austin on a Saturday in October. The reception was warm and full of people who loved Rachel and her now husband James. I was maid of honor. I had spent the entire day in service of my sister's happiness, and I was glad to do it, and it was a good day right up until the moment Daniel stood up during the reception dinner and asked for the room's attention. I did not know what was happening until he was already standing, and the room was already looking at him. By the time he turned to me with the ring box, I had approximately 3 seconds to process what was occurring. Those 3 seconds contained the following thoughts in approximately this order. This is happening. He did not ask me if this was okay. This is my sister's wedding. 112 people are looking at me. I do not want to say yes. I said no. I said it clearly enough for the people nearby to hear, and quietly enough that not everyone in the room heard immediately. Daniel stood there with the ring box open, and I looked at him, and I said I love you, and I cannot say yes right now, and I am so sorry this happened here. Then I stood up and I walked to the bathroom, and I sat in a stall for 10 minutes, and I listened to the muffled sounds of a reception trying to restart itself after something unexpected. Rachel came to find me. She knocked on the stall door and said my name, and I came out, and she looked at me for a moment, and then she hugged me without saying anything, which is one of the things I love most about my sister. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was, and that I was sorry about her reception. She said her reception was fine, and that the only thing that mattered was whether I was okay. I went back out. Daniel had left. The reception continued and was good for the rest of the evening in the specific resilient way of events that have absorbed something difficult and kept going. Daniel and I talked the following week. The conversation was long and honest and covered things we should have covered before we arrived at a ring box at my sister's wedding. I told him that my no had not been entirely about the proposal location, that the location was wrong, but that the location had also revealed something about a gap in how we understood each other. That he had believed a public proposal at someone else's wedding was something I would welcome told me something about how well he knew me. And examining that gap had produced the honest answer that I had been avoiding, which was that 4 years of working well together in the day-to-day was not the same as wanting the same future, and that I had known this for longer than the reception dinner. Daniel and I ended our relationship 2 months after the wedding. The ending was mutual in the way that endings are mutual when both people have been honest enough to acknowledge what was true. We are not in contact now, but I do not carry the ending badly. I carry the proposal differently, not as something I am ashamed of, but as something that told me things I needed to know in the most public possible setting, and that I responded to honestly even when honesty was the harder option. Update: 3 months later. Rachel called me last month to tell me that James's cousin, a man named Thomas who had been at the wedding and who I had spoken to briefly at the rehearsal dinner, had asked James for my number. Rachel said she had told James to check with me first. I said yes. Thomas texted me the following day. We have had coffee twice. He is thoughtful and asks questions and listens to the answers. On our second coffee, he mentioned the wedding and said he had been at a table nearby when Daniel proposed and that he had watched me stand up and walk to the bathroom, and that what he had noticed was not the no but the composure, that I had said a difficult thing in a difficult moment without cruelty and had walked away with my head up.
I did not know how to respond to that.
I thanked him and changed the subject and thought about it for the rest of the day. I am still thinking about it. Story 3. Reddit relationship stories. I discover my wife had been secretly paying my student loans for 3 years without telling me. My name is Marcus. I am 34 years old. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and 8 months ago I discovered that my wife of 5 years had been making monthly payments without telling me for 3 years, and that my loan balance was $47,000 lower than I had believed it to be. I want to tell you how I found out and what it did to my understanding of the woman I married, because the finding out is the part that matters as much as the fact itself. My wife's name is Elena. We met when I was 27 and she was 26, and we got married after 3 years together in a ceremony that was small and exactly right. I had come into our marriage with $94,000 in student loan debt from a graduate degree that had taken me 7 years to fully complete due to some difficult years in the middle. Elena had known about the loans from the beginning of our relationship. She had a stable income as a software developer, and I had been working my way up in my field, urban planning, not the highest paying profession, and we had managed our joint finances with a division that I had always understood to be transparent and mutual. I handled certain accounts. She handled certain accounts. We had a joint account for household expenses and separate accounts for individual expenses, and I had believed this was a complete picture of our financial life. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon when I logged into my loan servicer's account to update my address after we had moved apartments. I had not looked at my loan balance in approximately 8 months because the automatic payments were running, and I had not needed to. When I pulled up the account, I sat at my desk for a long time looking at a number that was significantly lower than the number I had been carrying in my head. I ran the payment history. 3 years of monthly payments larger than my automatic amount had been coming from an account I did not recognize. I called the loan servicer and asked about the account. They gave me the last 4 digits. I went to Elena's desk where she kept her financial files, and I found the account. It was a savings account she had opened 3 years ago and had been contributing to monthly and drawing from monthly to make additional payments on my loans. 3 years. Without telling me. While I had been carrying the psychological weight of $94,000 in debt, she had been quietly reducing it from an account I did not know existed. I sat in our apartment for an hour before Elena came home. When she came in, I was at the kitchen table with her account statement in front of me. She saw it and went still in the doorway. Then she came in and sat down across from me, and I asked her why she had not told me. What Elena said next I have thought about many times since. She said she had known the loans were stressing me in ways I was not fully expressing, and that she had wanted to do something about it but had been afraid that if she told me I would tell her to stop, and that my pride about the debt being mine to handle would have prevented her from doing something she believed needed to be done. She said she had planned to tell me when the balance hit 0, and had wanted the telling to be the moment I found out the debt was gone rather than the moment I found out she was helping. She had been 3 years into a plan that she estimated would take 2 more years to complete. I had found it 2 years early. I sat with everything she had said. I felt things that were complicated and layered, gratitude that was enormous, something that I needed to examine about my own pride and what it had cost her to work around it, a specific kind of love that I did not have words for, and still do not fully. I told her I needed a day to process. She said she understood, and she meant it in the way she means things, which is completely. The next day, I told her 3 things. I told her the love behind what she had done was one of the most significant things anyone had ever done for me. I told her I wished she had felt she could tell me, and that the fact that she had not was something I needed to look at honestly, because it was about how I had been carrying the debt in ways that had closed off her ability to be open. And I told her I wanted to know the full plan, and that I wanted to be part of completing it together. We moved the payments to our joint account. We looked at the payoff timeline together. We are 2 years from zero, and we are getting there together. And I know about it now, and every payment feels different than it did when I thought I was carrying it alone. Update 5 months later. We made a payment last month that brought the balance under $30,000 for the first time since I graduated. Elena had made a card, an actual handmade card, that said under 30K, with a drawing of the two of us that was not very accurate anatomically, but was very accurate emotionally. I put it on my desk at work. A colleague asked about it, and I told her my wife had made it to celebrate paying down my student loans. My colleague said that was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. I said I knew. I have known for 8 months, and I have not stopped knowing it for a single day. Story 4. Reddit relationship stories. My husband and I stopped talking for 19 days after an argument. What brought us back was something neither of us expected. My name is Diane. I am 39 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and 14 months ago my husband and I had an argument that was bad enough that we spent 19 days in our shared home without speaking to each other in any meaningful way. Not separated, in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, moving through the same rooms, in a silence that was the most exhausting and clarifying experience of our 12-year marriage. My husband's name is Richard. We have been married for 12 years, and we have always been the kind of couple who argues well. We had always said this about ourselves, had been proud of it, had told friends that we fought fairly and resolved things, and did not let things fester. The argument that produced 19 days of silence revealed that this self-assessment had been incomplete. The argument was about money. Not a dramatic financial betrayal, not a hidden account or a secret debt. A disagreement about a financial decision Richard had made, without consulting me, that I had found out about after the fact, and that had made me feel excluded from a partnership I believed required joint decision-making. The decision was not catastrophic in its consequences. It was significant in what it revealed about a pattern, that Richard had been making certain financial decisions unilaterally for years because he believed his financial judgment was better than mine, and that this belief had not been a conscious or malicious one but had been operating in our marriage as an unchallenged assumption for 12 years. I had said this in the argument, clearly and directly, and without softening. Richard had responded defensively in the way that people respond when something true lands as an accusation. The defensiveness had escalated. Things had been said that were not the argument's core, but that had been in the room waiting for an argument large enough to release them. We had gone to bed not speaking and had woken up not speaking and had continued not speaking for 19 days. I want to describe what 19 days of silence in a shared home actually involves because I think people imagine it as dramatic, and it was mostly mundane and exhausting. We said functional things: who is picking up the kids? Is there milk? The car needs gas. We did not say anything real. We ate dinner at the same table and looked at our phones. We watched television in the same room from opposite ends of the couch. We slept in the same bed with a distance between us that was not physical, but was completely real. On day 19, our younger daughter, her name is Sophie, she was 8 at the time, came to find me in the kitchen in the afternoon and told me she had a stomachache. I sat with her for a while, and she fell asleep on the couch, and I covered her with a blanket. Richard came home from work an hour later, and I told him Sophie had a stomachache, and he went and sat next to her on the couch, and she woke up and immediately climbed into his lap without fully waking and went back to sleep. I watched this from the kitchen doorway. Richard looked up and saw me watching, and we looked at each other over our sleeping daughter's head, and I felt something shift that I could not have manufactured deliberately and could not have predicted. Richard put Sophie to bed when she woke up an hour later and came back downstairs and sat at the kitchen table and said, "I am sorry," and I sat down across from him and said, "I am sorry too," and we talked for 3 hours, and it was the conversation the argument had been trying to reach and had not been able to reach until 19 days of silence had made us ready to have it. Richard acknowledged the assumption about his financial judgment. I acknowledged that some of what I had said in the argument had been accumulated things I had been carrying without addressing. We did not fix everything in 3 hours. We have not fixed everything in 14 months. But we ended the silence and we started doing the actual work, and the actual work is ongoing and real and ours. Update: 4 months later. Richard and I made our first fully joint financial decision last month, a significant one about our retirement accounts that we had always handled separately. We sat at the kitchen table with both of our statements and we talked through it together, and we made the decision together, and it took longer than it would have if Richard had just handled it as he had always handled it, and it was better in ways that the speed of the old process had never produced. Sophie asked us last week if we were happy. She is 9 now and perceptive in ways that tell me she remembers the 19 days even if she does not have a name for what she remembers. I told her yes. Richard said yes too. She looked at us both for a moment, in the way that children check the truth of what adults say, and then she nodded and went back to her drawing. I looked at Richard across the kitchen.
He looked at me.
We did not say anything. We did not need to.